The conference has been muted.
Hi, everybody. I've just muted all of you for a little bit. I will unmute when there's some time for questions. I'm starting pretty much exactly on time because I have a lot more material that I would like to present than we actually exactly have time to present. But hopefully we'll get through a bunch of it. I hope everybody received, there should have been an email that you got like about exactly an hour ago from ReadyTalk with the confirmation about this webinar, and in that was a link to download a packet of a PDF packet that had lots of things that will help lead your way through this webinar. The best way for you to ask questions during is to type them into the little chat on the side of your presentation, because that way I'll be able to answer it. And I will pause a few times and open up the general group if anyone would like to ask a question by saying it. But if you just type them in, then I will probably just respond to it as I'm going. So we've got a lot of material to go through, so we're going to right away come right in. So what we're talking about is reading Torah, and I really am, for the purposes of this workshop, really sticking exclusively with Torah. Not going to go too much into the rest of the biblical chanting. And I don't need to read this text for us to know that in front of you that most of us here know that the first recorded example of sort of the establishment of Torah reading is Ezra the priest. Right there it is in verse 2. Ezra the priest brought the teaching before the congregation, men and women, and all who could listen with understanding. He read from it, etc., etc. Look at the bottom in verse 8. They read from the scroll of the teaching of God, interpreting it and giving the sense so they understood the reading. So that's a nice story, but now we're going to see a little bit about what our rabbis of blessed memory did with this story. Right, the crucial verse here is Vayikru b'sefer b'torata Elohim miforash v'sum seichel v'yavinu b'mikra. Okay, so Talmud Bavli in Masechet Megillah, which though it's ostensibly about Purim, if you want to learn more about rabbinic law of reading any sacred text, Megillah is the place to go. So, Sefer Torah to Elohim, we define Mikra, that's Bible. Miforash, that's Targum, the Aramaic translation. Specifically, V'sum Seichel, these are Psukin, notice with the nun because we're in Aramaic, right? And then, Vayavinu Bamikra, look at this, Elu Piskei Te'amim. This is one of the first references we have in rabbinic literature to something called Te'amim, which we know is the Hebrew word for what we call Trop. So now the obvious question is, what does Piskei Te'amim, divisions of them, mean? Well, we'll get into a little bit more detail about what that is, but we're going to take one other step back into what, the word Ta'am, and this is a sort of phenomenal piece here, also from Bavli Brachot, right? Mipnei ma ein mekanchin biyamin ela bismol. Why do you wipe your tush with your left hand rather than your right hand? You know, you never know what answers you're going to get from a halachic, in the context of a halachic discussion. The answer is, what Rava says, because Torah was given with the right hand. Right? Mimino eish dat lamo. Lovely. Okay? Rabba bar Chana. Because you eat with your right hand. A very reasonable answer. Shimon ben Lakish. Because you tie your tefillin with it. But here's what we care about. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Mipnei shemar eba ta'amei Torah. We use it to show ta'amei Torah. And the Tanaim, Kitanai, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Why? Because you eat with it. Rabbi Eliezer says you eat with your right hand. Great. Rabbi Yoshua says because you write with it, and the assumption is writing sacred text, right? If you're going to write, the thing you're going to write is Bible. And Rabbi Akiva says, Mipnei shemar'eh et ta'amei Torah. So that's pretty early. As we're going in terms of talking about something here, rabbinics and ta'am and Torah, is Rabbi Akiva himself. Okay, so Rashi. What is Rashi going to tell us about what are these ta'amei Torah, right? Neginot ta'amei mikra shel Torah nevi'im uketuvim, right? Neginot, right? We know the word nigun, lenagen, is a word for melody. Sometimes you'll see him call it ne'imot. The question is there a difference between a negina and a ne'ima? I'm not sure. But here he says, bein hanikud shebesefer, right? Whether it's the vowels, bein hagbahat kol, uvetziltzul ne'imot hanegina shel pashta, darga, and shofar meupach. The name pashta, darga, those are Trop's names we know. Shofar meupach, we're going to see in a second, there are other names of the Tropes than we Ashkenazim use. Shofar meupach is, now I'm losing it for a second. I usually have it. Shofar meupach is mapach. And there's a chart that I'll show you that in a second. All right, so great. Then he says, a person moves their hands. Molich yado lefi tam hanegina. Ra'iti bekorim habaim me'eretz Yisrael. I saw this in Torah readers who come from the land of Israel. So those of us who took our class with Eli Schleifer in Jerusalem, remember he taught us about the word chironomy, which is still something that happens in some communities. Chironomy meaning movements of the hand. And you can still see it in some places where people read a lot of Torah, that there's someone who maybe stands next to the Torah reader and gives symbols, various movements of the hand to indicate phrasings of the trope. Okay, let's go one more step here into the importance of using trope. Right, so this is Rabbi Shefatia. This is one of my favorite quotes from the Talmud here. Rabbi Shefatia said that Rabbi Yochanan said, anyone who reads scripture without melody, kol hakoreh below ne'ima, v'shoneh below zimra. Scripture says, I love this, v'gam ani natati lahem chukim lo tovim. Okay? Now, here comes the challenge. Abaye challenges this and says, someone who can't sing, mishum de lo yada livsume kala, someone who can't raise up their voice, are you going to say that they don't get good rules by which they could not live applies to that person just because he can't sing? That's not nice. It doesn't really go much further than that in the Bavli, but this principle that the only way you are meant to study is with melody. So looking at these little kids here, we have one first recording to listen to. You get the idea. Maybe some of you have noticed that melody sounds very familiar to the Haggadah chanting melodies, right? And that's learning Mishnah, and they're learning it in this case, Hebrew, and then repeating it in Yiddish. But it is a way of learning text, and we all know that the best way to learn text is to sing it. And it turns out that the rabbis knew that a very long time ago, that when you sing something, you have a better memory for it. And especially if we're going to put ourselves in an ancient world mentality where printed texts are rare, we put a very high value at the memorization of text and every tool that we have to teach ourselves to memorize. So singing a text is the best way, rabbinically, to guarantee that people will remember it in some way. So I know that I was often taught that tropes are like this super unique thing in the world, the oldest system of musical notation, lucka, lucka, lucka. It's not exactly true, right? So what you have in front of you is a very difficult to see stone. There's these things called the Delphic hymns that were found in Greece, and if you can sort of see, there's a line of letters, and above them and around them are symbols that look not so different in some ways from our friends, the tropes. This is only one example of a world of symbols like this. For anyone who is looking, there's a packet that I will make available of sort of supplementary academic articles that has a little bit of a work from Johanna Spector about sort of tracing some of the other chanting styles around the world. Penny Kessler has just said that she's having trouble. She keeps getting her call dropped. If anyone else is having that trouble, please type in and tell me, and we'll see if we can fix it. Or if that's just Penny, then Penny will see. I don't know how I can help you, but see who else. If anyone else is having that trouble, maybe there's a larger problem we need to fix. So let's look at the beginnings of trope that we know of. And this is all documents coming from the Caira Geniza. So what you have in front of you is a piece of what's called the Palestinian or Eretz Israeli system. There were three totally separate divisions of trope that were created. What we have now we'll get to, but this is the earliest one as we know it. This is called the Eretz Israeli system or Palestinian. And if you're looking at this, you may be like, well, that page and this, like the text on one side and the page on the other seem difficult to match. Right? You can definitely see on the first line you can definitely see on the first line, I think I have a little pointer thing I can use. Hold on. All right, can you see the pointer? Good. Okay. On the first line of the Hebrew, of the picture there, you definitely see the word vehiktarta, and then it's just one letter, and each letter has little dots and squiggles and stuff on it. So here's the tricky thing. Those dots, each letter there is just one letter of the word, right? So I see vehiktarta, and then I see et kol ha'ayil. So I have aleph, et kol, lamed, ha'ayil, right? So, and then you basically get one letter per word in this particular format here. And the tropes, as they are these dots that are that are exclusively above the letters, pretty much. There's some below, but primarily they're on top. This is obviously designed for a person who really already knows the text by heart, and they just need to be reminded a little bit of the structure of the sentence and the tropes. So we have this in the Geniza a little bit. It didn't have a lot of play going beyond that. There are some claims that Yemenite Jews trope that they still practice is still sort of roughly based on this, but that is very hard to prove. Let's go to the next system, the Babylonian system. This one got a lot more play, and you could even see like the manuscript is much easier to read, is much clearer, written by probably a much better scribe. And this system is exclusively written on top of the letters, and sometimes the tropes themselves, which you can see, sometimes they look like letters and dots and things like that. Some of them actually do have forms that look roughly similar to some of the things that would become trope symbols that we know. The Babylonian system didn't make the cut for a number of reasons. One of them is that it was only trope and not vowels. The system of voweling, as we know, was developed in our third system, which is the Tiberian system. So, Tiberian system, right? This is a very early fragment from the Tiberian Massoretes, and it is exactly what we have today, right? It is exactly the Nikud. It is exactly all the tropes that we know and love in every which way. Those are developed in Tiberias by the Massoretes. Now, very little is actually known about the Massoretes. We know somewhere the range is either given between the 7th and 10th centuries, sometimes moved as far back as the 5th century in terms of this work. They are for sure based in the land of Israel and centered around Tiberias, but not exclusively. There has been some speculation that maybe the Massoretes were actually Karaites. Hard to know, right? It would make sense in terms of who are the people that are going to give such strong emphasis to Bible text primary. Makes sense that would be Karaites. Aharon ben Moshe ben Asher and Moshe ben Naphtali are the two strongest names. There are still works of theirs that you can find that where they talk a little bit more about the theory and give commentary. They're very, very difficult texts to understand. They're filled with piyutim and poetic references, and they don't like to say things directly. If you want to look up what they have to say about the Zarkal, you'll get 3 pages of a poem, and you're meant to figure it out from that. So they created the Massoretic Text. Now, it is a problematic text in a lot of ways, and talk to Bible scholars, and they'll give you more of that. But it is, as we all know, the authoritative text. And the most authoritative copy of the Massoretic Text is, of course, the Aleppo Codex, which has its own fascinating story. There's a book that came out about a few years ago about sort of the spy games involved in trying to get the pages. It currently, most of it, not all of it, there's still pages that have never resurfaced, but are assumed to be out there somewhere in the collection of some private thief, is on display at the Israel Museum. It's one of my favorite things to go. It's in the Shrine of the Book, actually. So, like, if you're in the Shrine of the Book where all the Dead Sea Scrolls are, and then you have to, like, go into this little basement thing underneath it, and you will find the copy of the Aleppo Codex right there that you can sort of take a look at and appreciate. So the one piece of it that we're going to take a second before we get to too much Jewish stuff is the Samaritans, right, who or would identify themselves as Hebrews rather than Jews, and they do chant the Torah. The picture here is of a Torah scroll they call the Abisha scroll, which supposedly they claimed is thousands of years old and is like an original Torah, as it were. And so we're just going to listen a little bit to them singing Shirat Hayam, since that's this week's portion. Totally fascinating and bizarre, right? There's been actually a significant amount of academic work done about the Torah reading traditions of the Samaritans. There are some things that are quite curious about their readings. They insert sort of nonsense syllables sometimes for dramatic and celebratory effect. The most important thing that you'll see is that where are the Samaritans, asks Fran Burgess. The Samaritans primarily live in the north of Israel, around Har Gerizim. It's a very small group at this point. They are super duper insular, and their claim as a people is that when the rest of us went to Bavel, they hung out and stayed there and kept true to the tradition, as it were. And then when we all came back and reestablished the Second Temple, they were already a separate group. They maintained their Torah scroll in ancient Hebrew script, which is a good reminder that when we look at the Hebrew letters that we know of, they are Aramaic letters. They are not Hebrew letters. And in the Talmud, it will say something like Kitav Ivri, Hebrew letters, and it means these letters that you see in front of you that the Samaritans use. One of the really interesting things to hear is that the Samaritans, right, separated off well before the Massoretes. So when I'm listening, anything that I think of as being Nikud based is different. So the first thing you're gonna notice is he's gonna say Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamim, right? Because shamayim is already a Nikud issue. So let's just listen a little bit to the Samaritan chanting of Bereshit. Super interesting, super strange in a lot of ways. It's obviously very Arabic influenced, but just in a different place. It's the way we could have gone without the help of the Tiberians, as it were. Just as a historical curiosity, right? We know that Trop is reserved exclusively for biblical text. However, there have been miscellaneous documents in the past that were printed with Trop. So here you have two examples of Mishnahs that are actually printed with Trop. One is a sort of a handwritten manuscript, and you can see a few tropes here and there. Right? I got an Etnachta there, and there's the Zakef Katon, and there's a few others, right? There's a Tipcha. So, and over here on this printed edition, there's a few, right? Ha'isha Nikneit, right? Right, there's that nachtaz, just sort of basic punctuation things, right? Because Hebrew does not have a native punctuation system, so maybe this is someone's attempt to use tropes for what they're for. It didn't take on, right? So that you don't see almost any other text ever with trope symbols. There are some rumors that I've heard about Maimonides attempting to put trope on the introduction to the Mishnah Torah, but I've only heard of those rumors as things that were debated, and then I've never seen the evidence of it. So I wouldn't necessarily tell that story without further evidence of it. Are the two versions here consistent with each other? Gershon Solons asked. They are not the same text, so I do not know. I would assume not. I think these are probably individual printers making their own choices. So here we go. Let's listen to some Torah around the world. So Eli Schleifer, in like an encyclopedia article, Penny Kessler asks, is there a recording of Mishnah being chanted? Actually, the first recording that we heard with those little yeshiva boys was them chanting Mishnah. There's lots of recordings of sort of what you call, I guess, what the Maharil, right? The Maharil, our grand sort of founder of Ashkenazic cantorial things in many ways. He called the melodies of chanting Mishnah and Gemara Stubentrop. By the way, if you want an article all about the word trope, so Josh Bright is saying Lernsteiger. So Lernsteiger, Stubentrop are all different words for the melody of chanting of rabbinic text. But Eric Werner wrote a whole article about the word trope and how it came to mean what it means. Incidentally, it is only Ashkenazim that use the word trope. No one else uses the word trope, and it's not Yiddish also, is another impression that people have that it's a Yiddish word. Werner suggests that it's from a Latin/Greek origin, and the first usage of it is in Rashi. Anyway, so Eli Schleifer suggests that there are all over the world about 8 global traditions of trope and everything of Torah singing, and everything else is sort of divided within these. And obviously within any one tradition, if you put Yemen and say it's one tradition, a Yemenite would probably struggle with that definition, because there are 50 different Yemenite traditions, just as we know, probably within just our world of Eastern Ashkenazic traditions, there's 50 different ways that it all gets sung. But this is a helpful sort of way to look at how you divide up the world in different ways. So here we go. Let's just go in order. Yemen. Okay, so we're going to start with a Yemenite trope for the beginning of Bereshit, which is, I think this is pretty florid chanting.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'torah v'horas ha'elotam v'hashach al tanisan v'ruach Elohim marahat al tanehem moyim.
So one thing you can hear about that, it's obviously very improvisatory in nature, but the strongest melodies are on the Etnachta and the Sof Pasuk, as one would expect. That's pretty important in terms of thinking about all of these tropes. Like, we in Ashkenazic world have had our tropes be highly systematized, and that is not the case for other trope systems. So improvisation is much more a part of their world. The other extraordinary feature of Yemenite chanting is the Aramaic Targum. So here is just an example. You're going to hear the adult male sings the Hebrew, and then it's chanted quite floridly, and then it's chanted, repeated in the Aramaic translation by a child.
ويامر من شاء لحظات.
And note how different this trope is from what we just heard, but they're both Yemenite. So this is how Torah reading is described in rabbinic literature, as a back and forth, verse by verse like this. The Yemenites are the only group to still maintain that tradition. As I said, those two Yemenite traditions were obviously very different from each other. But there is a lot to be said about Yemenite trope in general. There's been some articles written about it. It's hard. It's one of the harder tropes to try to match trope symbol to melody, which is why some people claim that maybe they have a different orientation towards some of the trope systems than we have. So let's listen to some Kurdish trope. Right, Kurdistan is a really exciting place for trope, actually. Listen to what they do. This is they have a separate tradition just for Simchat Torah. You get the point, right? It's fast. It's very fast, and it's very florid. Now, this is more florid than you would hear on a regular Shabbat. Right? Regular Shabbat, not Simchat Torah. It's a little more flat. This is them really making an effort to try. So from the same geographic group, but in a very different way, is Iraqis, and the Iraqis are very, very, very careful about their trope symbols in a way that some of the other groups are not. So the first thing we're going to hear is they're just going to sing trope symbols.
طرحان شوفوا ولي قاعدنا ما عريف طرحان ما عريف صوبته ربيع ما عريف شني فاستي دقيق قطن طرحان مقب شوفوا ولي قاعدنا شوفوا ولي دقيق قطن طرحان مقب ما عريف صوبته ما عريف طرحان شوفوا ولي قاعدنا مقب صوبته.
Okay, now let's see if the way they actually chant it sounds similar. Much more florid in the actual word. Right. It's a relatively simple trope compared to some of the other ones that really go crazy, but they are very, very, very makpidim, very careful about always being right on with the tropes as they are. So that's what Eli distinguishes that as a different sort of tradition generally from the sort of more global Sephardic world, which the Syrian tradition sort of won out in many ways. Other academics do not distinguish these as separate groups, but we're going to hear, this is a little bit of a learning style for the Syrian tradition. The first piece that we're going to play is actually they sing how they learn to spell a word, And then after that, they sing the trope name and then the word. Trope name, word, trope name, word, trope name, word. It's a really cool, you feel like you're in the cheder a little bit. So the first part is they're going to spell the words Eloheinu v'Elehevotenu.
שבע פתח הארץ חולם בו אבות תרתנו שורקנו אבותינו ככה היינו לומדים הטעמים תביא ולמעריך תולדות ישמעאל אדנח בן אברהם הזמריש אשר ילדה דרגת תביא
You get the idea. Now, I will say, if you want to learn the Sephardi Yerushalmi tradition, which is sort of what became of the Syrian tradition, it sort of becomes just this general Jerusalem Sephardic. The institute in Jerusalem called Rinanot made one book that they called Vishinantam Levanecha, and then they sold a series of CDs with it of different traditions. They are very difficult to get now because Rinanot more or less went out of business. But they exist in the world, and if you can find it, then Ezra Barnea will sort of lead you through, but almost in a similar way to the book that we all know and love from Jose and Marshall Portnoy, that sort of teaches you a phrase. But the problem is, right, so as Ashkenazim, we are very used to being very precise. Our tipcha goes, tipcha, right? We write it out with our dotted eighth note, 16th. But this CD with Ezra Barnea, he goes like, ma'arich tarcha, ma'arich sof pasuk. And then he goes, ani hozer. Ma'arich tarcha, ma'arich sof pasuk. And it's totally different. And he does that over and over again. He goes, Hazarti, and you're supposed to repeat every time, but it's different every time. And that's part of the core of this tradition. But most Israelis learn how to read Torah in that system, in this sort of Sephardic, pan-Sephardic tradition that is most owned by the Syrian Jews. And of course, the Ades synagogue, where many of us went to go hear the Bakashot, is like the grand home of that tradition. Still included in this world of Sephardic, Arabic influence, but a little more Western, is the Greek tradition. I think this is a great example of sort of exactly where Greece stands in the world, of sort of being, Turkey's on one side and Europe's on the other, and it really, you can feel that in this trope.
בראשית ברא אלוהים את השמיים ואת הארץ והארץ היה תוהו ובוהו וחושך על פני תהום ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים ויאמר אלוהים יהי אור ויהי אור וירא האור כי טוב, ויבדל אלוהים בין האור ובין החושך, ויקרא אלוהים לאור יום.
Right, it's exactly sounds like what it is, right? It's this place where the Sephardic Jews of Greece are very much in between cultures, and so there is this Araby nature to it, but also it connects you with the sort of the culture of Greek folk songs that are so much more Western in nature. And the trope captures their exact geographic place perfectly, which I think is really exciting. Now, it's almost impossible to hear, which is, by the way, the reason a lot of these recordings sound very old is that they are very old. And these are the pioneering works of a number of really dedicated musicologists who worked very, very hard. And Eli was actually amongst those people. During the mass aliyot, towards the beginning of the State of Israel, that people went around just trying to tape everything they could, already knowing that much of it was going to be lost. And all of those recordings are housed at the Jewish Jewish National University Library in Jerusalem, and you can access all of them. And many of them, even just from your computer at home, you can download and listen to on their website, which is really fun. It takes a little work to get to what you want to get because they're not all cataloged so easily and made available, but they're all there, which is very exciting to have this tradition. And so a lot of these recordings were capturing people right when they got to Israel, before they more or less got, I guess, what you might call polluted by being in Israel. So we're going to move to sort of North Africa, but still closer to the Arab, the Arab side of North Africa, unless the Maghreb, is Egypt. Which, remember, Egypt is especially, Cairo was one of the major Karaite significant holdings in the world. The Karaite population in Cairo is very large until modern times. So there's I feel like there's a Karaite influence a little bit in their trope. Only in sort of the attention to Torah chanting there is just something a little bit different. So let's listen to this Egyptian tradition. This would be very hard to learn to do if you didn't grow up in it. It sounds much more like Quranic recitation. It's impressive, right? Now, I can't, this is one of those recordings that makes you wonder about the recording effect. First of all, there's very few synagogues you could go to today where you would still hear sort of a live Egyptian-specific tradition. So it's a difficult tradition to capture anymore. But you can't imagine really on a Shabbat morning hearing a full Torah portion done that way because you'd never get home. So it's almost certainly in this case that this is someone really doing it up for the recording. I guess there's that, like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? You can't look at something without messing with it. So by sticking a microphone in someone, you're getting him to bring his fanciest game. But I think the connection to what obviously sounds like really putting Torah chanting as a significant major part of the experience, right? We already know in a traditional service that Torah is at the very center, right, in between Shacharit and Musaf, and is the lengthiest part of the service. And this is really elevating it even farther by having it be such an elaborate chanting style. And I would hope to also imagine in terms of the Egyptian. Yes, Sarah Lipset Allison points out much more improvisation than trope. I think that's true, though. They may not agree. They may really feel like that when they talk about what the trope of, tipcha, or what they call tarcha, would be, that it includes all of that within that trope in a way that we think of tipcha's specific notes. So it's hard to define what's what here. But, Egypt saw itself as really the capital of the Arabic music world. Kulthum comes from there, and Egypt is the cultural center in many ways, separate from Turkey. Right? Turkey is the Ottoman culture, and Egypt is was for until oil, I would say, the capital of Arabic culture. So the Jews of Cairo really saw themselves in that position too, I think. So we're going to go to Morocco, and this, if you downloaded the packet of materials that I sent out, you'll actually find notation of this trope. It's on the 7th page of the packet from a book called La Musique Juive de Fez. And I was impressed to see actually how closely this recording ends up following exactly the trope that you'll hear. So let's listen in on this Moroccan trope, and you can follow the music almost precisely. Hello.
בראשית ברא אלוהים את השמיים ואת הארץ, והארץ הייתה תוהו ובוהו וחושך על פני תהום, ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים, ויאמר אלוהים יהי אור, ויהי אור, וירא אלוהים את האור כי טוב, ויבדל אלוהים בין האור ובין החושך, ויקרא אלוהים לאור יום ולחושך קרא לילה, ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום אחד.
Now, Moroccan trope, by the way, has in it, if you talk to Moroccans, they really acknowledge two separate trope systems that you would hear. There's what this is, which was the sort of more basic, the basic trope, and then there is a separate tradition of much more florid trope. I couldn't find a really good recording of it, which I was sad about, but sometimes if you go to Moroccan synagogue, you'll hear, and there's even like an excitement because people know who the people are who are going to do the cool trope. And they come up and they start reading Torah, and everyone's like, oh, you got to listen to this guy, right? And then they go, and it's complete virtuosic display of all the wonders of Moroccan music. And then the next person comes up, and it's back to this, right? And it's back to a more simple chant. But it's a really interesting concept in terms of the way that the community navigates. Maybe part of the answer back to Abaye in the beginning, someone who can't really sing. So they have the tropes for people who can really sing, and the tropes for people who can make notes. I think we effectively end up with that in the way that some of us work with our B'nai Mitzvah kids as to what we expect of a good musical kid versus what we expect of a kid who struggles. There are some really wonderful. I used to have a congregant in New York who actually made a little CD to help teach some of us Moroccan trope. It's a very cool little thing. If I have to locate it again, but if anyone is looking for it, email me and I'll see if I can drum it up. I might still be able to find it. So, Italy, right? Eli Schleifer, in Eli Schleifer's chart, we have North Africa and then Italy, right? The Italian Jews are their own separate tradition. They are not Sephardic. They are not Ashkenazic. They are Italian. And their trope is super-duper Italian. And this one also you have fully notated in the packet from Canti Liturgici Ebraici, whatever, which notates the Roman community. There are some really cool books that really notate out the communities, like the Florence community has a music book that notates their musical tradition, though it does not include the trope. But here we go. Right, so here's music written out for Bereshit Bara Elohim, and again, I was impressed to see how the recording really does fit almost precisely with the printed music here. I think that's incredible how much of a big deal that Italian trope makes of every Sof Pasuk. Is such a major statement. In many tropes that we may have heard, you may see that Sof Pasuk is really less of a central focus here. But here, for whatever reason, Sof Pasuk really gets a lot of play. I think it's such a beautiful musical chant. And by the way, especially since you have it notated so easily there, this past year at Simchat Torah, I like to do a little thing where I sort of do different trope systems for Devarim and Bereshit. Since you have it so easily notated, it really is not hard to learn this little incipit of Italian trope for yourself, and on Simchat Torah to lead that for your congregants could be really fun, and just give them a different experience of what Torah might sound like. So from one sort of classical tradition to another, like the Spanish Portuguese. The Spanish Portuguese tradition is, as we know, the history of them, right? They were the Jews who were converted mostly to Catholicism and then found their way to Amsterdam, where they recreated a tradition in which they brought up mostly North African Chassidim to come and teach them how to sing, and then they westernized what those North Africans did. So you have in the packet the page from the selected Sephardic chants by Cantor Cardozo, what he identifies as the Te'amim for the Torah. I find this trope to be sort of underwhelming in some ways, but it's worth including because it is its own tradition.
בראשית ברא אלוהים את השמיים ואת הארץ, והארץ הייתה תוהו ובוהו וחושך על פני תהום, ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים. ויאמר אלוהים יהי אור, ויהי אור, וירא אלוהים את האור כי טוב, ויבדל אלוהים בין האור ובין החושך, ויקרא אלוהים לאור יום ולחושך על הלילה, ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר.
Right, it's a very fast trope, which I think has to do with, the Spanish-Portuguese tradition is very heavy on choral music, and the davening parts of the service are quite lengthy and drawn out, and so the Torah chanting can't also be that way. Penny Kessler just writes me that she is having trouble getting the packet. If anyone else is not able to find where the packet was, you should have gotten an email from Ready Talk about an hour before the presentation that had in it a link to download the full PDF packet. So all of that is all over the world. Let's come home. Ashkenazic tradition. So the first ever notated version of our Ashkenazic tradition comes from Johannes Reuchlin, who was a Christian scholar who learned Hebrew from his local Jewish population. There was a whole obsession, right, in the 15th to 16th century with Jewish music as somehow connected to ancient melodies, and they thought everything the Jews sang went back all the way to the temple. Okay, but here's the most bizarre thing, right? So you can look at Reuchlin's notation and see some connections with what happened in later trope, and if you there's an article available that actually goes really into detail about looking at comparing Reuchlin's trope to the Ashkenazi tradition as we know it. But here's what is really bizarre. If you're looking at this, you see that it's the same tropes 4 times on the picture, and you notice it says like alto, tenor, right? This basso, this is a choral setting. This was Christoph Schilling, one of Reuchlin's student. Josh Breiter asks, is this the first notate music right to left along with Hebrew text? I would no. Well, probably in Western staff, but I think probably Ovadia the proselyte is much earlier than this. So I would put him as the first person anyway. So I'm going to play a little video for you about a group that is trying to recover this choral Torah chanting, right? This is not a native Jewish tradition in any way. This is a Christian musician who is taking the melodies of the tropes and setting them for 4-part choir. So I'm going to play this video. Hold on, it says it's loading. Click the play button.
These beautiful harmonies that you hear are part of the reconstruction and arrangement of polyphonic fragments based on Jewish liturgical chant that are to be found in a book of 1518 by Johannes Reuchlin of
I'm going to pause there because I have a lot more things I want to say, but isn't that a cool video? The video is on YouTube, by the way. You can find it, not so hard, and it just sort of blows your mind that that exists. It's really hard to it's hard to say much about it, and there it is, right? I have it could be interesting. The article that is available that has a reconstruction does have some of the things renotated in modern notation. So if you were looking to put on a Torah chanting concert, you could, I guess, develop a score like they have from it. I know Charles Osborne has expressed some interest in actually doing that. The next guy who really notates Ashkenazic music is Athanasius Kirschner, who's sort of a really cool, weird guy in general. Just look him up a little bit just for the fun of it. He's one of these people who seem to know everything about everything, and he has multi-volume books that are just filled with pictures and illustrations about everything and science and literature, and it's very full. So I gave you in the packet I gave you in the handout, which I know some of you didn't manage to find the email from Ready Talk, so I'll try to work that out. First of all, some of the pages from Reuchlin and some of the modern retyped of them, and then some pages from Kirschner's book here, which gives first of all, I love he gives Latin names for the tropes, which I sort of enjoy. I think my favorite was Zakef Gadol's Erector Major, was one that I thought was sort of an amusing name, and his musical notation for all the tropes. The book is, of course, written in Latin. It's a question of what to do with these. There are various musicologists that have attempted to sort of match them with traditions. They don't always match quite perfectly, and there are some who say that maybe the people who taught these Christians the tropes may have been sort of in some way deliberately misleading a little bit for fun. But this is the best we have, right, because Jews didn't have access to the tropes. On to sort of the German tradition as we received it. So in the packet, I gave to you what I could find, one of the earlier versions that I could find of someone writing out the tropes in a way that was sort of easier to see, which was 1895. This guy Strauss, who wrote out a Zarqa chart, which is obviously the Zarqa charts are not always the easiest thing to actually use. But they're written out there and they are recognizable in some of the things that we can hear in contemporary German trope. And I also gave you the version of the German trope that is put out that was in the Hertz Pentateuch, the old Hertz Chumash, that was used for a while. Now, Gershon Sillens is on the call, and he's definitely telling us that Germans are not the same as British exactly, which is why I have two different recordings. So first, we're going to hear Eli Schleifer telling us, singing some German tradition here.
Eis hashomayim ve'eis ha'oretz ve'ha'oretz oyes osahu v'vahu v'chaushech al pnei tehom ve'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamoyim v'yaomer Elohim yehi aor v'yehi aor.
So, right, it sounds recognizable to us in many ways from what we more or less know. And just as the extension, I asked Zoe Jacobs to give us a recording of what she teaches to her kids in London. And here's what she says.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vohu v'choshech al penei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al penei hamayim Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or Vayehi Or.
Right, it's very similar. It does. It sounds a little bit like our Haftarah. I think I hear that a little bit in the tonality of it. I agree. One of the things that I always think is funny is when I hear kids do it, British kids. There's a feeling that I always felt was a little bit. I want to say equestrian about it. That you start saying da 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 da. I sort of remember I went to a bar mitzvah at West London, and I sort of left feeling like it had a sort of a gallop to it that was entertaining. Gershon Sillons points out that if you want to learn this trope, is that Chani or Chani Smith teaches this exact thing at Leo Beck College and has a book you can get that has it. And Victor Tunkel has done an even more detailed version of it, so that is available if you wanted to learn British trope. There is the world of liberal Judaism and Reform Judaism in England is out there to help us learn it. Just email Gershon and he'll help you out. So let's move to Eastern Europe. I will start with Chabad, which I think Chabad, you'll hear their trope. It's not what we know of Eastern Europe. It's actually, I think, somewhere really closer to the Germans. And I gave you in the packet the piece of the tropes from Sefer HaNigunim, from the book of Nigunim from Chabad, where they give you their melodies for the tropes. And then I also gave you a little commentary about them, which the first paragraph is in Hebrew, and then after that it's actually in Yiddish, which might be harder. But even the Yiddish has it's got some really good information about sort of the values of the various rabbis of Chabad and what they felt about sort of being very, very, very makpid, very careful about precise performance of tropes. So let's listen to a little bit of Chabad.
בראשית ברא אלוהים את השמיים ואת הארץ והארץ ויססהו בגוהו וחשך על פני תהום ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים ויאמר אלוהים יהי ער ויהי ער וירא אלוהים את הער כי טוב ויבדל אלוהים בין הער ובין החשך.
So I know that I'm already out of time, that it's 12, that it's already, I have 2 minutes. But I have a few more things I wanted to show you. So we're going to have to move a little bit quickly, but also if people are able to stay a few minutes extra, I'm happy to stay a few minutes extra. So Binder, right? So I gave you in the packet the article that Binder wrote about how he described the rebirth of biblical chant in America, which obviously he attributes largely to himself. But okay, and he really talks about how the very beginning of the Reform movement in Germany, one of the first innovations was to get rid of chanting of Torah and to just read Torah, which I know many of us encountered even in my lifetime as a kid. Like many kids who had B'nai Mitzvah when I was little, when I was a kid, just read their Torah portion and didn't always chant. So the article is really interesting in terms of seeing sort of how it is exactly that he went about getting towards the publication of the biblical chant book that we know and love, and really the support of Stephen Wise in reinstituting Torah chanting. As we know, Torah chanting in the Ashkenazic world is broken out into all these different versions for the other books. I'm not telling you here. This is mostly for if you were to teach this class to other people. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other things that have been done with Torah trope that are sort of interesting. Just a few more slides. This is one of the weirdest ones. This woman, Suzanne Haik-Vantour, she was a French organist, sort of a musicologist-esque person, she decided on her own that she could understand the tropes, and she invented this very complex system. It is true pseudoscience in the best way. The book Music of the Bible Revealed is like 600 pages long, and you can download it for free, by the way, in PDF on the web. And more or less, she sort of created a system by which she could create chanting melodies based on various interpretations of the trope that are almost impossible if you're not her to understand. and the way that she knew that she was right about her reconstruction of the original melodies of the Bible was that they sounded pretty to her. Okay, now it may sound like this is totally a totally bizarre person, but a lot of people seemed to kind of believe her, and she was very well published, and there were like 4 albums made of her recordings. So I'll just play a little bit of the Akedah in her recording just for the sake of it. And I have in the packet, I was able to locate the sheet music for her version of the Akedah. Oh, I think I put it in the wrong order in the packet. So in the packet, they actually have Solomon Rosovsky's cantillation first, but skip over Rosovsky for a minute, and we'll play Suzanne Haik-Vantour. Just a minute so you can hear the sense of it. Of course, the Torah is meant to be chanted in Phragish. I'm not going to play more than that. There's lots and lots of these. It's sort of entertaining, if nothing else, and just a way to see someone has done something really odd with this. The next person I have that did something cool is Solomon Rosovsky, right? So he wrote, really, Binder's work on Torah chanting is really based on Rosovsky, who was a faculty at JTS, and is one of the people who really brought back Torah chanting and did the work to do the systemization of Torah chanting the way we know it. He was also a really wonderful composer in his own right. So here is just a little taste of this piece of that he set cantillation and harmonized it really cool. Because one of the things I wanted to show is the way that people have taken Torah trope and done cool things with it. So this is just a little piece of it. And you have this entire piece is in the packet. Very beautiful harmonization. I don't understand how he chose this specific text as the most beautiful thing to set, though. It's a really pretty piece. It could be an interesting thing to use in your congregational life in different ways. I don't really have time to play either of these pieces exactly, but two really interesting pieces based on trope. Right? Leonard Bernstein's Symphony 1 is based on Haftarah trope, not Torah trope, but still, right? The whole piece is da 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 da. I don't know if you can hear that. Right, it's called profanation, as in prophets, as in Haftarah. Now, the other piece that's like, so there's a whole article that Steve Reich wrote about cantillation as part of his way into composition. It is not, it's called Octet 8 Lines. It is not in any way based on the actual melodies of Torah trope. It is entirely based, however, on his theoretical construction of what Torah trope is doing. And in the packet of articles that you can request, there is a whole article that he wrote about Hebrew cantillation and composition, where he really describes the theory behind the construction of this piece. I can play a little tiny piece of it, but you will not hear anything to do with Torah trope in it. And it basically sounds like that. Fran Burgess asks, how did the Reform movement and Conservative movement decide to accept their own versions of the tropes? It's not what a movement decision, Fran. It was really based on the specific people teaching at JTS versus HUC at the times. It was not a movement decision anyway. It was just Binder taught at HUC, and I think Rosowski was still teaching at JTS at the time, and they differed. And that is what happened, and why we have, like, conservative Jews go Dan Monach Katon and Sof Pasuk, and Reform Jews do Hawina, right? They're not different, really. They're just different teachers who taught the different things. This is the last piece I want to play for you, which is, again, a Haftarah trope piece, but I think it's so cool, and I love sharing it. So this was at Israel's 65th anniversary a few years ago, and the official ceremony on Har Herzl, where they light the torches, and Shlomo Gronich got up and did this performance of Haftarah trope. The whole thing is is almost 5 minutes long, so we're not going to watch the whole thing. You can find it online, but it was just such an extraordinary performance of Shlomo Gronich performing this with this Orthodox men's dance group. I love it.
שלמה גרוניך בפסוקים א' עד ד' מפרק ב' בספר ישעיהו. מלווים אותו רקדני האנסמבל הדתי כעת. הדבר אשר חזה ישעיהו בן אמוץ על יהודה וירושלים. והיה באחרית הימים נכון יהיה בית אדוני בראש הערים ונישא מגבעות ונהרו אליו כל הגויים.
For time's sake, I'm going to pause it there. I'm going to open up the audio, and while I'm doing that, I'm just going to tell you all.
The conference has been unmuted.
In having the materials from I'm happy to share with everyone a full PowerPoint presentation, along with a collection of academic articles, helpful background material, and gap packs, and all of that, and the Hebrew trope, and the Hebrew font that I really like. Also, that is Society for Biblical Literature, that trope for font for displaying trope. And so, if anyone has time to ask. No questions. I answered everything. Perfect. Thank you all for coming. Really excited. Tell your friends that they're recording on soon. And we'll make it available for everyone who's able to be here at this exact time. And hopefully we'll find more opportunities together. I really am serious. It would make my greatest joy to know that you were sharing this material, congregations, and helping everybody learn about Torah chanting. So Shabbat Shirah to everyone. Have a beautiful, great music. I hope everyone's self is inspiring and perfect. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.